They watched you struggle, but they only saw fragments, never the full picture, never the deeper movement taking place beneath the surface. And for a while, even you started to believe what they believed, that the delays meant you were falling behind, that the silence meant nothing was happening, that the weight you were carrying was proof that something had gone wrong in your life but chosen one. What if I told you that everything they witnessed was only the outer layer of a transformation too powerful to be understood from the outside? What if the very moments that looked like confusion were actually alignment? What if the pressure you felt was not meant to break you, but to reshape you into a version of yourself that could carry what is coming next? Because this is where most people get it wrong. They judge your life based on what is visible, but your real evolution has been happening in places no one had access to, in your silence, in your endurance, in the private decisions you made when no one was watching. And that is why this message is not random. If you are hearing this right now, it is because something inside you recognizes the truth before your mind fully catches up. So don't scroll past this moment, like it's just another video. Pause and acknowledge where you are in your journey. If you've ever felt overlooked, misunderstood, or counted out, go ahead and like this video. If you know deep down that your story is not finished and something greater is forming in your life, subscribe and stay connected to this frequency. And if you refuse to remain in the version of yourself they underestimated, comment, "I'm still rising," because what they missed while watching you struggle is the very thing that is about to separate you from everything they thought you would always be. And when it reveals itself, it won't need explanation, it will speak for itself. They saw the struggle, but what they never understood is that what looked like you falling apart was actually you being pulled into alignment. And that difference is everything. Because from the outside, your life may have seemed inconsistent, uncertain, even unstable at times. But internally, something far more precise was happening. Something intentional, something guided, something that could not be measured by the speed of your progress or the approval of people around you. And the reason this season felt so confusing is because you were living in the space between who you used to be and who you are becoming. And that space is never comfortable. It is never clear. And it rarely makes sense while you are inside of it. Because transformation does not announce itself with clarity. It often disguises itself as loss, as delay, as disconnection, as silence. And if you are not careful, you will misinterpret the very process that is preparing you as proof that you are going backwards, but chosen one. You were never going backwards. You were being repositioned, and repositioning always feels like disruption before it feels like direction. Because anything that is not aligned with your next level has to be shaken loose before it can be replaced. And that is why things started to shift in ways you did not expect. Relationships began to feel distant. Environments that once felt normal began to feel heavy. Conversations that once energized you started to drain you, and you could not fully explain it, but you could feel it. Something was off, something was changing. Something was no longer fitting the way it used to. And while others looked at those changes and assumed something was wrong with you, what they failed to recognize is that your awareness was increasing, your standards were evolving, your sensitivity to what no longer belongs in your life was sharpening. And that kind of shift always creates friction, especially with people who are still comfortable in the version of you that you have outgrown. And this is where the misunderstanding begins, because when people see you in transition, they often label it as instability, when in reality, it is expansion. They see your silence and assume you are lost, when in reality, you are listening more carefully than ever before. They see your distance and think you are withdrawing, when in reality, you are protecting your energy from things that can no longer sustain where you are going. And the truth is, most people only understand progress when it looks linear, when it looks predictable, when it fits into a timeline they recognize. But your journey was never meant to be predictable. It was designed to stretch you beyond familiar patterns, beyond external validation, beyond the need to explain yourself at every step. And that is why this phase required you to trust what you could not fully see yet. Because alignment is not always visible in the beginning. Sometimes it feels like confusion before it reveals itself as clarity. Sometimes it feels like pressure before it reveals itself as strength. Sometimes it feels like isolation before it reveals itself as protection. And this is the part they could not see, the internal recalibration that was happening beneath the surface. The way your mindset was shifting, the way your tolerance for what drains you was decreasing, the way your intuition was becoming louder, even in the absence of external confirmation. And while they were focused on what you lost, you were being guided toward what actually belongs to you. And that guidance does not always come with loud announcements. It often comes through subtle redirections, through doors that quietly close, through opportunities that fade before they fully materialize, through delays that force you to slow down and reconsider. And in those moments, it is easy to question everything, to wonder if you made the wrong decision, to wonder if you are missing something, to wonder if you are falling behind, while everyone else seems to be moving forward. But what you have to understand is that not all movement is progress, and not all stillness is stagnation. Sometimes the fastest way to your next level is to stop running in directions that were never meant for you. And that is exactly what this season was doing. It was interrupting patterns that would have kept you stuck. It was removing distractions that would have diluted your focus. It was breaking attachments that would have limited your growth. And none of that feels good while it is happening. Because growth is not always comfortable, alignment is not always gentle, and transformation rarely asks for your permission before it begins. But it always serves your evolution in ways that only become clear in hindsight. And that is why you have to be careful not to judge your current position based on temporary appearances, because what looks like delay is often divine timing. What looks like confusion is often deeper clarity forming beneath the surface. What looks like being overlooked is often being protected from spaces that cannot recognize your value yet. And the people who were watching you during this time did not have access to that perspective. They were only seeing the external shifts, the pauses, the inconsistencies, and they interpreted those things through their own limited understanding, because people will always project their own fears onto your process. They will assume your silence means weakness because they fear stillness. They will assume your distance means failure because they fear being alone. They will assume your delays mean defeat because they measure success by speed instead of substance. But your journey was never meant to be understood by those who are not aligned with it. And that is why their perception does not define your reality. Because while they were forming opinions, you were forming strength. While they were questioning your direction, you were developing discernment. While they were labeling your season as a setback, you were building the foundation for a level of stability they cannot even see yet. And that is the shift you have to recognize, because the moment you stop interpreting your life through the lens of external validation is the moment you begin to see your process for what it truly is. Intentional, guided, necessary, and leading somewhere greater than where you have been. And once you understand that everything changes, because now you are no longer reacting to appearances, you are responding to alignment. You are no longer chasing confirmation from people who cannot see what you are becoming. You are learning to trust the internal signals that are guiding you even when the external world feels uncertain. And that trust is what separates those who remain stuck in cycles from those who break into new levels, because growth is not about avoiding discomfort. It is about understanding what that discomfort is trying to do for you. And in your case, it was not trying to break you. It was trying to reposition you. It was trying to prepare you. It was trying to align you with something that requires a version of you that could not exist without this process. And the sooner you accept that, the easier it becomes to move through this phase without losing your sense of direction. Because now you understand that what they saw was not the full story. They saw the struggle, but they missed the shift. They saw the pressure, but they missed the precision. They saw the delay, but they missed the design. And you chosen one are beginning to see it clearly now that nothing about this season was random, nothing about it was wasted, and nothing about it was working against you. It was all working for you in ways that are only now starting to reveal themselves. And as that clarity continues to unfold, you will realize that the version of you emerging from this process is not just stronger. It is more aligned, more aware, more intentional, and far more prepared for what is coming next than the version of you that entered this season. And that is the part they never saw, but soon they will not be able to ignore it anymore. And as you begin to understand that what they saw was never the full story, you also start to realize that what felt like everything breaking down was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to filter what could no longer move forward with you. Because there is a level of growth that cannot happen while everything stays the same. There is a version of you that cannot emerge while you are still surrounded by what kept you comfortable. And this is where most people misunderstand the nature of loss, because they assume that when something leaves their life, it is a sign of failure, a sign of rejection, a sign that something has gone wrong but chosen one. In your case, the breakdown was never punishment. It was precision. It was the careful removal of everything that could not survive the environment you are being prepared to step into. And that is why the losses felt so specific, so targeted, so undeniable, because it was not random chaos. It was intentional separation. It was the kind of separation that only happens when your life is being recalibrated at a deeper level than what is visible on the surface. And the reason it felt so intense is because you were not just losing things. You were losing attachments, identities, expectations, and familiar patterns that once gave you a sense of stability. And when those things begin to dissolve, it creates a kind of discomfort that goes beyond physical loss. It touches your sense of self. It makes you question who you are without those connections, without those roles, without those environments. And that is why this phase required more from you than just endurance. It required awareness, because without awareness, you would have mistaken this process for destruction instead of understanding it as refinement. And refinement is never comfortable. It is not gentle. It is not always clear. And it rarely feels fair in the moment, because it involves removing what is familiar in order to make space for what is aligned. And alignment does not negotiate with comfort. It prioritizes purpose. And that is exactly what was happening in your life, even when it did not make sense at the time. Because if certain people had remained, they would have slowed your growth. If certain opportunities had worked out, they would have limited your expansion. If certain environments had stayed accessible, they would have kept you operating at a level that no longer matches who you are becoming. And this is where you begin to see the deeper intelligence behind what you experienced, because what you thought you were losing was actually protecting you from settling into something that was too small for your future. And protection does not always feel like safety in the moment. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it feels like isolation. Sometimes it feels like being cut off from what you thought you needed. But what you needed and what you were used to are not always the same thing. And that distinction is what this phase was teaching you. It was teaching you how to let go of what is familiar without assuming that you are being abandoned. It was teaching you how to trust that removal can be as purposeful as addition, and that what leaves your life is not always being taken from you sometimes. It is being cleared out so that what truly belongs can find space to enter. And the people who watched this process from the outside did not have the context to understand it. They only saw things falling away. They saw relationships ending, opportunities disappearing, patterns breaking, and they assumed you were being stripped down. They assumed you were losing your footing. They assumed you were becoming less than what you were before. But what they failed to recognize is that you were not being reduced. You were being refined. And refinement always looks like reduction before it reveals itself as elevation, because before something can be built to last, everything unstable has to be removed. Everything weak has to be exposed. Everything misaligned has to be released. And that process is not quiet. It is not subtle. It disrupts what you thought was solid. It challenges what you thought was secure. And it forces you to confront parts of your life that you may have outgrown but had not yet let go of. And that confrontation is where the real growth happens, because it is in those moments that you begin to see clearly what is actually supporting your future and what is only maintaining your past. And once you see that you cannot unsee it, you cannot go back to being comfortable in spaces that no longer align. You cannot continue investing in connections that drain more than they give you. Cannot keep holding on to versions of yourself that were built for a season you have already outgrown. And this is why the breakdown had to happen the way it did, because a gradual shift would not have created the level of awareness you needed. A slow transition would have allowed you to hold on to things longer than you should have. But this process was designed to make the truth undeniable. It was designed to bring clarity through contrast, to show you what no longer fits by removing it completely. And in doing so, it forced you to stand in a space that felt unfamiliar, uncertain, and at times uncomfortable. But it was in that space that you began to rebuild differently. You began to think differently. You began to prioritize differently. And most importantly, you began to see yourself differently, not as someone who is losing everything, but as someone who is being prepared for something that requires a higher level of clarity, a higher level of discipline, and a higher level of alignment. And that is the part they missed. They saw the breakdown, but they did not see the filter. They saw things falling away, but they did not see what was being protected. They saw what you no longer had, but they did not see what you were no longer willing to accept. And that shift in your standards is what changes everything. Because once your standards change, your entire life begins to reorganize around that new level. And that is what is happening now, whether they understand it or not, whether they acknowledge it or not. Because your life is no longer being shaped by what is convenient. It is being shaped by what is aligned, and alignment will always require separation before it delivers expansion. And now that you have moved through that phase, you are beginning to see that nothing was taken from you without purpose, nothing was removed without reason, and nothing that truly belongs to you will ever be lost in the process. Because what is meant for you is not fragile. It does not disappear under pressure. It does not collapse when things become uncertain. It aligns, it remains. It strengthens, and it finds its way to you in ways that do not require you to compromise who you are becoming. And that is the difference between what was filtered out and what is still on its way. And once you fully understand that, you stop grieving what left, and you start recognizing what it made room for. Because the breakdown was never the end of something valuable. It was the beginning of something far more aligned than anything you had before. And as everything that could not remain was filtered out of your life, what followed was a silence that many people would have mistaken for weakness. But in your case, that silence was not emptiness, it was construction. It was the quiet space where something far more powerful than noise could take shape, because there is a level of growth that cannot happen in constant reaction. There is a version of you that cannot emerge while you are still explaining yourself to people who were never meant to understand you. And this is where your journey began to shift in a way that made others uncomfortable, because they expected you to respond the way you always had. They expected explanations, reactions, emotional responses, justifications, something they could interpret, something they could measure, something that would confirm their assumptions about where you were in life. But instead, they were met with something unfamiliar, something they could not read, something they could not provoke. And that was your silence. And what they did not realize is that your silence was not a sign that you had nothing to say. It was a sign that you had grown beyond the need to say anything at all, because when you reach a certain level of awareness, you begin to understand that not every situation requires your energy. Every misunderstanding requires your defense, and not every opinion deserves your attention. And that understanding does not come from avoidance. It comes from clarity. It comes from recognizing that your energy is a resource, and where you place it determines the direction of your life. And during this phase, you were learning how to conserve that resource in a way you never had before. You were learning how to observe without reacting, how to detach without becoming cold, how to remain present without becoming entangled. And that kind of discipline is not visible to people who are used to measuring strength by volume, because they associate power with being loud, with being expressive, with being reactive. But true power does not need to announce itself. It reveals itself through control, through restraint, through the ability to remain grounded when everything around you is trying to pull you out of alignment. And that is exactly what you were developing, even if you did not have the language for it at the time. Because while they were waiting for you to respond, you were recalibrating how you engage with the world. You were redefining what deserves your attention. You were setting boundaries that did not require explanation, and those boundaries were not walls built out of fear. They were structures built out of awareness, designed to protect what is being formed within you. And that formation required space. It required distance from noise, distance from opinions, distance from expectations that were never aligned with your future. And in that space, something began to solidify. Something began to take shape. Something that could not have been developed if you had remained in constant interaction with everything that once defined you. Because growth at this level requires a degree of isolation, not as a form of punishment, but as a form of preparation. Because when you are constantly surrounded by external input, it becomes difficult to hear your internal direction, and your internal direction is what was being strengthened during this time. Your intuition was becoming sharper, your discernment was becoming clearer, your ability to recognize what aligns and what does not was becoming more refined. And those are not skills that develop in chaos, they develop in stillness. They develop in moments where you are forced to sit with yourself, to listen, to observe, to process, without distraction. And that is what your silence was creating. It was creating an environment where your next level could be built without interference. And the people who were watching from the outside could not see that, because they were interpreting your stillness through their own discomfort. With silence, they were projecting their own fear of being alone onto your decision to step back. They were assuming that your lack of response meant you were lost, when in reality, you were becoming more focused than ever before. And this is why your silence unsettled them, because it removed their ability to predict you. It removed their ability to influence you. It removed their access to a version of you that once responded in ways they understood. And when people lose that access, they often misinterpret it as distance, as disconnection, as weakness. But what they are actually experiencing is your growth, because growth changes how you engage. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what you respond to, and it changes what you are willing to explain. And during this phase, you were no longer operating from a place of needing to be understood. You were operating from a place of being aligned. And alignment does not require validation. It requires trust. It requires the ability to move forward, even when your decisions do not make sense to others, even when your silence is questioned, even when your distance is misunderstood. And that trust is what was being built in you, because without it, you would have been pulled back into cycles that no longer serve you. You would have been drawn into conversations that dilute your focus. You would have been pressured into explaining things that are still in the process of forming, and explaining something too early can expose it to opinions that weaken its development. And that is why your silence was necessary. It was not about avoiding people. It was about protecting the process. It was about allowing what is being built within you to reach a level of stability before it is exposed to external interpretation. And that kind of discipline is rare, because most people feel the need to share, to explain, to validate their decisions in real time. But you were learning to move differently. You were learning to let your actions speak after the process is complete rather than during it. And that shift is what separates those who are constantly reacting from those who are intentionally creating. Because when you are reacting, your energy is scattered. But when you are creating, your energy is focused. And focus is what builds momentum. Focus is what creates results. Focus is what allows something internal to eventually become visible. And that is where this is all leading, because your silence was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be preparatory. It was the phase where you gathered your strength, where you refined your perspective, where you aligned your actions with your direction. And now, as that process continues to unfold, the results of that silence are beginning to take form, not in a way that needs to be announced, but in a way that will be recognized without explanation. Because when something is built with intention, with clarity, with discipline, it carries a presence that does not require validation. It speaks for itself, and that is what you are stepping into. A level of presence that reflects the work you have done in private. A level of clarity that reflects the time you spent in silence, and a level of strength that reflects the discipline you developed when no one was watching. And when that becomes visible, the same people who misread your silence will begin to see it differently, not as weakness, but as power, not as absence, but as preparation, not as loss, but as transformation. And by the time they recognize it, you will have already moved into a space where their understanding is no longer necessary, because you are no longer building your life around being seen, you are building it around being aligned. And that is the kind of foundation that cannot be shaken by misunderstanding, because it was not built on external perception. In the first place, it was built in silence. It was built in discipline. And it was built in a way that ensures that when it finally reveals itself, it will not need to be explained. It will simply be undeniable. And as your silence continued to build something within you that others could not interpret, it became increasingly clear that the reason they misjudged you was not because you were unclear, but because they were unequipped to recognize what they had never become themselves. And that realization is where a deeper level of understanding begins to take root, because for a long time you may have questioned whether you were doing something wrong, whether you should have explained more, shown more, reacted more, or proven yourself in ways that would make your process easier for others to understand. But what you are beginning to see now is that their inability to recognize your transformation was never a reflection of your lack of progress. It was a reflection of their limited perspective, because people interpret what they see through the lens of their own experience, and if they have never undergone the kind of internal shift you are going through, they will not have the framework to understand it. They will default to what is familiar to them, They will categorize your growth based on patterns they recognize, and when your process does not fit those patterns, they will label it as confusion, inconsistency, or even failure, not because it is, but because it is unfamiliar to them. And unfamiliarity often gets mistaken for dysfunction by those who are not ready to see beyond their current level of awareness. And this is where you begin to release the need to be understood by everyone, because you realize that understanding requires alignment, and alignment cannot be forced. It can only be recognized by those who are operating at a similar level of awareness. And that is why some people drifted away, not because you rejected them, but because your evolution created a gap that they could not cross, a gap in perception, a gap in priorities, a gap in how you see the world and how you respond to it. And that gap is not something you are meant to close by lowering yourself. It is something that exists to show you who is aligned with your next level and who is still connected to your previous one. And once you understand that, you stop trying to make yourself smaller, to fit into spaces that no longer reflect who you are. Becoming, you stop explaining your decisions to people who are committed to misunderstanding them. And you stop seeking validation from those who measure success by standards that no longer apply to your life, because your journey is no longer about being accepted, it is about being aligned. And alignment will always require you to outgrow environments, relationships, and mindsets that once felt normal, and that outgrowing process can feel isolating if you interpret it through the lens of loss. But when you see it through the lens of evolution, it becomes something entirely different. It becomes confirmation that you are moving forward, even when it feels like you are moving alone. And that sense of moving alone is often misunderstood, because it is not about being abandoned. It is about being repositioned into a space where your growth is no longer constrained by what is familiar. And in that space, you begin to develop a level of clarity that was not available to you before, because you are no longer filtering your decisions through the expectations of others. You are no longer adjusting your direction to maintain comfort, and you are no longer compromising your awareness to preserve connections that no longer align. And that clarity changes everything, because it allows you to see situations for what they are not, what they appear to be. It allows you to recognize when something is aligned with your future and when it is only connected to your past. And that level of discernment is what separates those who repeat cycles from those who break them. Because once you can see clearly, you can no longer pretend that something fits when it does not. You can no longer justify staying in environments that limit your growth. And you can no longer ignore the internal signals that guide you towards something greater. And that is what was developing within you. During this phase, a level of awareness that does not rely on external confirmation. A level of confidence that is not dependent on approval, and a level of direction that is not influenced by the opinions of those who do not understand your path. And as that awareness deepens, you begin to move differently, not in a way that seeks attention, but in a way that reflects alignment. You become more intentional with your time, more selective with your energy, more focused on what actually contributes to your growth, rather than what simply maintains your comfort. And that shift is not always visible to others, because it does not always produce immediate external results. But internally, it is creating a foundation that is far more stable than anything built on external validation. And that is why your process may have seemed slow to those who were watching, because they were measuring your progress by what they could see, while your real progress was happening in ways they could not measure in your mindset, in your discipline, in your ability to remain consistent, even when results were not immediately visible. And that kind of growth is often overlooked in a world that prioritizes speed over substance. But it is that very growth that determines how far you can go once opportunities begin to align. because without it, any success you achieve would be difficult to sustain. And that is why this phase was necessary. It was not just about getting you to the next level. It was about preparing you to remain there. And preparation at this level requires a depth of awareness that cannot be developed in comfort. It requires you to face your own patterns, to recognize where you have been operating from habit rather than intention, and to make adjustments that align your actions with your future rather than your past. And those adjustments are not always easy because they often require you to step away from what is familiar, to make decisions that others may not understand, and to trust a direction that is not yet fully visible. But as you continue to move in alignment with that direction, you begin to see evidence that you are on the right path, not necessarily in immediate results, but in a growing sense of clarity, a growing sense of peace, and a growing confidence in your ability to navigate uncertainty without losing your sense of direction. And that is the kind of growth that cannot be replicated by those who are still dependent on external validation, because it is built from within, is reinforced through experience, and it is sustained by a level of awareness that continues to expand as you move forward. And that is why those who once misjudged you will eventually begin to see you differently, not because you explained yourself, not because you proved them wrong, but because your results will reflect a level of alignment that they cannot deny. And by the time that shift becomes visible, you will have already moved beyond the need for their recognition, because you will understand that your journey was never meant to be validated by those who could not see it from the beginning. It was meant to be lived, to be experienced, and to be trusted, even when it did not make sense to anyone but you. And that trust is what has brought you to this point. A point where you are no longer questioning whether your process is valid, but recognizing that it was necessary, intentional, and leading you exactly where you are meant to go, even if others could not see it along the way. And as your awareness expanded beyond the need to be understood, something else began to unfold quietly but undeniably. Because while they were still trying to interpret your silence and make sense of your distance, you were already being elevated in ways that did not require their recognition. And this is where your journey takes on a different kind of momentum, one that is not driven by external validation, but by internal alignment. Because elevation at this level does not begin with applause. It begins with preparation. It begins in spaces where there is no audience, no immediate reward, no visible confirmation that anything is changing. And yet everything is changing, because what is being built within you is starting to attract opportunities, environments, and connections that are aligned with who you are becoming rather than who you used to be. And this is why things may have started to shift in subtle ways before they became obvious. You may have noticed new ideas forming new directions, becoming clearer, new possibilities appearing that you had not considered before. And at first, these shifts may have seemed small, almost insignificant compared to what you had been expecting. But what you have to understand is that elevation rarely announces itself with something overwhelming. At the beginning, it often starts with alignment with the right thought, at the right time with the right opportunity, appearing when you are finally ready to recognize it. And that readiness is what this entire process has been preparing you for, because without it, you would not have seen these opportunities for what they truly are. You might have overlooked them, dismissed them, or even sabotaged them by trying to fit them into an outdated version of yourself. But now, because of everything you have gone through, you are able to recognize alignment. When it appears, you are able to discern what is worth your time and what is not. And that discernment is what allows elevation to take place without resistance, because you are no longer trying to force things that do not fit you, are allowing what aligns to unfold naturally. And that shift in how you move is what changes everything, because now, instead of chasing outcomes, you are aligning with them. Instead of forcing connections, you are attracting them. And instead of trying to prove your worth, you are operating from a place where your value is already established within you. And that internal shift is what begins to create external change, even if it is not immediately visible to those who are watching from the outside, because they are still looking for the kind of progress that is loud, immediate, and easy to measure. But your elevation is happening in a way that is steady, intentional, and built to last. And that kind of growth does not always produce instant results. But when it does become visible, it carries a level of stability that cannot be easily shaken. And that is why this phase required patience. Because what is being built is not temporary. It is not something that will fade under pressure. It is something that is designed to support you at a higher level for a longer period of time, and that kind of structure takes time to develop it. It takes consistency, it takes discipline, and it takes a willingness to continue moving forward even when you cannot yet see the full picture. And that is exactly what you have been doing. Even in moments where you questioned whether anything was changing, even in moments where it felt like you were standing still while others were moving ahead, you continued to align your actions with your growth. You continued to refine your mindset, and you continued to trust that what is being prepared for you will reveal itself at the right time. And that trust is what has allowed this elevation to begin taking shape, because without it, you would have returned to what is familiar. You would have settled for what is available rather than waiting for what is aligned. And that is what separates this phase from anything you have experienced before. Because this time you did not compromise this time. You did not rush this time. You allowed the process to complete itself. And because of that, what is coming into your life now is not based on urgency. It is based on readiness. It is based on alignment. And it is based on a version of you that is capable of sustaining it. And this is where the shift becomes undeniable, because the same people who once saw you struggling will begin to notice changes that they cannot explain. They will see you moving differently, making decisions with a level of clarity that was not there before, stepping into opportunities that seem to appear at the right time, and they will wonder how it happened. They will try to trace it back to a specific moment, a specific decision, a specific event, but what they will not see is that this elevation was not the result of one moment. It was the result of a process that required you to go through phases that did not make sense at the time. A process that required you to let go of what was comfortable, to trust what was uncertain, and to continue moving forward, even when there was no immediate evidence that anything was changing. And that is why your elevation carries a different kind of energy, because it is not built on luck. It is not built on external circumstances. It is built on internal transformation, and that kind of foundation is what allows you to step into new levels without losing your sense of direction, because you are not dependent on what is happening around you to determine how you move. You are guided by what has been built within you, and that internal guidance is what keeps you aligned, even as your external environment begins to change. Because elevation often comes with new challenges, new expectations, and new levels of responsibility. And without the preparation you have gone through, those things could easily become overwhelming. But because you have taken the time to develop yourself in private, you are now able to handle what is coming in public. And that is the part they never saw. They saw the struggle, but they did not see the preparation. They saw the delays, but they did not see the development. They saw the silence, but they did not see the discipline. And now, as everything begins to come together, they will only see the result. They will see the outcome of a process they never understood. And that is why it will seem sudden to them. It will seem like everything changed overnight. But you know the truth. You know that this has been building for a long time. You know that every phase you went through contributed to this moment. And you know that nothing about this elevation is accidental. It is the direct result of the choices you made when no one was watching, the discipline you maintained when no one was acknowledging it, and the trust you held on to when there was no visible confirmation that it would pay off. And that is why this next phase of your life will feel different, because it is not just about what you have. It is about who you have become, and who you have become is someone who can carry what is coming without losing alignment, without losing clarity, and without losing the awareness that got you here in the first place. And that is what makes this elevation sustainable. That is what makes it real, and that is what ensures that what you are stepping into now is not something that will pass. It is something that will continue to expand as you continue to grow, because this is not the end of your journey. It is the beginning of a new level, one that reflects everything you have been building in silence, and one that will soon become visible in ways that no one can deny. And as this elevation becomes more visible and begins to take form in your life, there is a realization that settles in quietly but powerfully, because you start to see that their underestimation of you was never a disadvantage. It was an advantage that gave you something most people never receive, and that is space. Because when people assume you are not a threat, when they believe you are not progressing, when they decide you are not worth watching closely anymore, they stop interfering. They stop projecting expectations onto you. They stop trying to control how you move. And in that absence of pressure, you are given a rare opportunity to rebuild yourself without distraction, without resistance, and without the weight of needing to perform for anyone else. And that kind of freedom is not always recognized in the moment, because it comes disguised as being overlooked, as being dismissed, as being counted out. But what you have come to understand is that being overlooked allowed you to grow without interruption. It allowed you to experiment without judgment. It allowed you to develop your mindset, your discipline, and your direction without having to explain yourself at every step. And that is a level of freedom that many people never experience, because they are constantly being watched, constantly being evaluated, constantly being pulled into expectations that limit how they evolve. But you were released from that cycle not by accident, but by design, because your journey required a level of focus that could not exist under constant observation. And that is why their underestimation was necessary, because if they had recognized your potential too early, they would have projected their fears onto it. They would have tried to influence your decisions. They would have inserted themselves into your process in ways that could have slowed your growth. But instead, they stepped back, not because they understood what was happening, but because they misjudged it. And in doing so, they gave you exactly what you needed: the ability to grow in peace, the ability to build without interference, and the ability to align yourself fully with your next level before anyone had the chance to question it. And now, as you step into this new phase, you begin to see how valuable that was, because the version of you that is emerging is not dependent on external validation. It is not shaped by external pressure. It is not limited by external expectations. It is the result of a process that was allowed to unfold naturally at its own pace in its own time, and that is why it carries a level of authenticity and stability that cannot be replicated by those who rushed their growth or built their lives around the approval of others. Because when you grow in silence, you develop a connection with yourself that is not easily shaken. You learn how to trust your own decisions. You learn how to love without needing constant reassurance. And you learn how to remain aligned even when external circumstances change. And that is the kind of strength that cannot be taught through external success. Alone, it has to be developed internally through moments where you are forced to rely on your own awareness, your own discipline, and your own ability to stay focused on what matters. And that is exactly what this phase has given you. even if it did not feel like it at the time, because what felt like being overlooked was actually protection. What felt like being dismissed was actually preparation, and what felt like being underestimated was actually an opportunity to grow beyond the limitations that others would have placed on you if they had seen your potential too soon. And now, as everything begins to align and your progress becomes more visible, you will start to notice a shift in how people respond to you, because the same individuals who once overlooked you will begin to pay attention. Again, they will begin to question how you reached this point. They will begin to reassess their assumptions about you. And some may even try to reconnect, to reinsert themselves into your life now that they see what is unfolding. But the difference now is that you are no longer the same person they once knew. You are no longer operating from a place of needing their recognition, and you are no longer available for the same dynamics that once existed, because your growth has changed, your standards, your awareness has changed your boundaries, and your alignment has changed your direction. And that is what ensures that this next phase of your life will not be a repetition of the past, because you are no longer moving. In the same way, you are no longer making decisions based on what is familiar, and you are no longer allowing underestimation to define your position. You are using it as leverage, as confirmation that your process is working, and as a reminder that not everything that looks like a disadvantage is actually working against you, because in your case it was working for you. It was creating the exact conditions you needed to grow into who you are now. And as you continue to move forward, that awareness will stay with you. It will guide how you respond to future situations. It will remind you that not all recognition is necessary, and it will reinforce the understanding that sometimes the greatest advantage you can have is the freedom to grow without being fully seen, because that is where the most authentic transformation takes place. And that is exactly what has happened to you. And as you continue stepping into this new level with a clarity that no longer depends on who understands you, something begins to shift in a way that does not need to be announced, because the reveal that is coming into your life will not arrive as a moment of explanation. It will arrive as a presence that speaks for itself. And this is where everything you have been building in silence begins to translate into something visible, something undeniable, something that no longer needs to be defended or justified. Because when something is truly aligned, it carries its own authority. It carries a weight that cannot be dismissed, and it creates a kind of recognition that does not come from what you say, but from what you embody. And this is why you will not need to go back and explain your journey to those who misunderstood it, because explanations are only necessary when something is unclear, and what is about to unfold in your life will be clear in a way that does not require words. It will be reflected in how you move, in how you carry yourself, in the decisions you make, and in the opportunities that begin to align around you. And those who once questioned you will begin to notice the difference, not because you told them, but because it will be evident, it will be present in a way that cannot be ignored. And this is where the dynamic shifts completely, because the same people who once observed your struggle without understanding it will now be faced with a version of you that challenges their previous assumptions, and they will not know how to reconcile the two. They will not know how to explain how the person they thought was falling behind is now moving with clarity, with confidence, and with a sense of direction that they cannot access, and that confusion is not your responsibility to resolve, because your journey was never meant to fit into their expectations. It was meant to unfold according to your alignment, and alignment does not require approval. It requires consistency. It requires the willingness to continue moving forward, even when your progress is not being acknowledged, and that is exactly what you have done. And that is why this reveal will feel different, because it is not something you forced. It is not something you rushed. It is something that has developed naturally as a result of your growth. And when something is built that way, it carries a level of authenticity that cannot be replicated. It does not need to compete for attention. It attracts it. It does not need to prove its value. It reflects it, and that is the kind of presence you are stepping into, one that is not based on external validation, but on internal alignment. And as that presence becomes more visible, it will begin to shift how others respond to you. Because people respond differently when they sense certainty. They respond differently when they recognize that you are no longer operating from the same place they once understood. And that shift in their response is not something you need to control. It is something that will happen naturally as a result of your growth, because when you change internally, your external environment begins to reorganize itself around that change. And that reorganization is what creates the reveal, not as a single moment, but as a series of shifts that gradually become impossible to ignore. And this is why you do not need to rush anything. You do not need to force your progress to be seen, and you do not need to seek recognition from those who did not see your value before, because what is coming into your life will create its own recognition. It will establish itself in a way that does not rely on opinion, and it will position you in environments where your presence is understood without explanation. And that is the difference between being seen and being recognized, because being seen can happen without understanding, but being recognized requires alignment. It requires a level of awareness that allows others to perceive what you have become. And that level of awareness is not something you can demand from everyone, but it is something that will naturally exist in the spaces you are moving into. And that is why this next phase of your life will feel different, because you are no longer trying to be understood in environments that cannot hold your growth. You are stepping into environments that reflect it. And in those environments, your presence will not need to be explained. It will be received, it will be valued, and it will be aligned with what is being built within you. And that is what makes this reveal so powerful, because it is not just about what others will see. It is about what you will no longer need to prove. It is about the freedom that comes from knowing that your growth has reached a point where it speaks for itself. And that freedom is what allows you to move forward without hesitation, without doubt, and without the need to look back at those who once misunderstood you, because your focus is no longer on being validated by the past. It is on continuing to build in alignment with your future. And as you continue to do that, the reveal will not just be something that happens once. It will be something that continues to unfold layer by layer, level by level, in a way that consistently reflects the work you have done in silence. And by the time it is fully visible, there will be no question left about who you have become, because it will be clear, it will be present, and it will be undeniable.